Almost everything you think you know about the last queen of Egypt was written down by the men who destroyed her, and by poets working for the man who paid them. Her father's family was never Egyptian, and who her mother was, nobody knows. She probably wasn't a great beauty. Our single richest ancient source says so in plain words, and the coins she struck with her own face on them agree with him. The carpet she was supposedly smuggled in wasn't a carpet. The snake at the end was never actually seen by anybody. And the seductress who allegedly wrecked 2 Roman generals with her body spent 21 years running a client kingdom between 2 Roman civil wars, in a job where her own relatives kept trying to kill her. None of this crept in slowly over the centuries. The version you know was manufactured deliberately by one man in a war he needed to win. And he was so good at it that 2,000 years later it's still the version showing up in films. Cleopatra VII. She was born in the winter of 70 or 69 BC in Alexandria to a king called Ptolemy XII. That much is firm. Her father's line is Macedonian Greek and nobody seriously disputes it. Now the part that gets shouted about and the part that actually deserves care. We do not know who her mother was. We also don't know who her father's mother was. 2 of the 4 slots at that level of her family tree are simply blank in the record, and no amount of arguing has filled them in. The Egyptologist Joyce Tildesley put a number on the honest range. Given what's missing, Cleopatra was somewhere between 25 and 100% Macedonian in descent. That's the whole truthful answer. People who tell you she was definitely Egyptian are overstating it. People who tell you she definitely had no Egyptian ancestry at all are overstating it in the other direction, and that second version gets treated as the sober, scholarly one, which is exactly how it slips past you. What she certainly was, and what nobody argues about, is something the blank slots can't touch. She was a Greek monarch of Egypt, in a Greek city, at the tail end of a dynasty that had been running the country for 2.5 centuries without ever really joining it. Ptolemy I, one of Alexander the Great's generals, took Egypt in 305 BC and simply kept it. His descendants ruled from the coast, spoke Greek at court, married their own brothers and sisters, and left the ancient machinery of the country turning along underneath them. Alexandria was a Greek city on the Egyptian coast, built to be exactly that. The lighthouse out on the island of Pharos stood over 100 meters tall in 3 tiers, on a base wide enough to hold something like 300 rooms for its workers and its fuel. One of the 7 wonders, and already 2 centuries old when she was a child. Almost everything around her was old. Here's the arithmetic that resets the picture. The Great Pyramid at Giza was finished around 2560 BC. She died in 30 BC. That's a gap of roughly 2,500 years. The gap from her death to the first men walking on the moon is about 2,000. She lived closer in time to the Apollo landings than to the pyramids, which were already ancient ruins in her own country when she was born. Her father died in the spring of 51 BC, and she took the throne at about 18 years old. She took his arrangements with it, which meant sharing power with her brother, Ptolemy XIII, still a child. Ptolemaic power sharing worked the way Ptolemaic power sharing always worked. Within 2 years, the boy's court had pushed her out of Alexandria completely, and by 49 BC he was being recognized as sole ruler. She went south, then east, and raised an army. In 48 BC, that army got stopped near Pelusium, on the eastern edge of the delta, and while she sat there blocked, Rome's civil war landed on the beach behind her. Pompey the Great, freshly beaten by Julius Caesar at Pharsalus, sailed for Egypt expecting shelter. The boy king's advisors worked out who was going to win, and had Pompey killed as he came ashore. When Caesar arrived days later, they presented him with the head. It didn't go the way they'd planned. Caesar occupied the palace quarter and announced he'd settle the family dispute himself, in person. Which left her with one very specific problem. She was outside the city, and the palace was full of her brother's soldiers, so she had herself delivered. This is the famous one, and the famous version is wrong. There's no carpet in it. Plutarch tells the story in his Life of Caesar, not his Life of Antony, and his words are these. She stretched herself at full length inside a bed sack, while Apollodorus tied the bed sack up with a cord and carried it indoors. A bedding roll, tied with rope, carried through a guarded palace at nightfall by one Sicilian, because Plutarch says she'd found it otherwise difficult to escape notice. That's a smuggling operation. It worked. And what it bought her was a private hour with the most powerful man in the Mediterranean before her brother knew she was in the building. What followed was a siege. Her brother's general Achilles brought something like 20,000 troops against Caesar's 2 legions and pinned them in the royal quarter for months. Caesar set fire to the Egyptian fleet in the harbor, and the fire spread into the city. Whether it took the great library with it is genuinely unsettled. Plutarch says the library burned. Cassius Dio says a great number of fine books burned. Other ancient writers describe the same fire and don't mention the library at all. In January of 47 BC, the boy king drowned, fleeing a battle, and his sister came out of it holding Egypt. 6 months later, on the 23rd of June, she had a son. An Egyptian stele records the exact date, which is more precision than most ancient births get. She named him Ptolemy Caesar. Egypt called him Caesarion, Little Caesar, and she said publicly and permanently that Julius Caesar was his father. Caesar never once said it back. He never acknowledged the boy legally. She went to Rome in 46 BC and stayed as Caesar's guest with her child in a city that noticed. Then, in March of 44, a group of senators killed Caesar on the floor of a public meeting, and every arrangement she'd made stopped being worth anything overnight. She went home. Her remaining brother, Ptolemy XIV, died shortly afterwards, and the ancient sources point at her without quite finishing the sentence. From the 2nd of September, 44 BC, she ruled with her 3-year-old son as co-ruler. She'd solved the problem in front of her and created a worse one, because a boy claiming to be the son of Julius Caesar was now walking around alive, and there was another young man in Rome whose entire claim to power was being Caesar's heir. Here's the part the films leave out, and it answers what she actually was. She ran the place. Plutarch, who isn't writing a flattering portrait, says she rarely needed an interpreter, and that she dealt directly with Ethiopians, troglodytes, Hebrews, Arabians, Syrians, Medes and Parthians, and knew the speech of many other peoples besides. Then he adds a line that lands harder than he probably intended. The kings of Egypt before her, he says, had not even made an effort to learn the native language. She did. Whether she was strictly the first Ptolemy to bother is arguable, since at least one account says her father picked it up too, so call it what it plainly was. She broke a 300-year family habit of governing a country in a language its people didn't speak. And the paperwork survives. A decree from her chancery in April of 41 BC protects landowners from over-eager tax collectors. A tax exemption on papyrus from 33 BC carries one word at the bottom. Genesto. Make it happen. The papyrologist Peter van Minnen argued that word is in her own handwriting, since only the Queen could sign an edict into law. It's a wonderful idea, and it isn't settled. Bagnall, Darrow and Sari aren't convinced it's even in a different hand from the rest of the sheet. Stacey Schiff sums the reign up without any romance in it. A capable, clear-eyed sovereign, she knew how to build a fleet, suppress an insurrection, control a currency. 21 years on that throne, and Egypt was quieter under her than it had been for a century and a half. She was also doing something cleverer than that, and you can still go and look at it. On the wall of the temple complex at Dendera, there's a relief of a pharaoh and her son making offerings to Egyptian gods in full Egyptian style, cartouche and all, wearing a crown that combines the sun disk, the horns and the throne sign, the symbols of Isis. That's her. Not a Greek queen visiting Egyptian religion politely. A pharaoh, carved in the local visual language, claiming a local god's authority. After her son's birth, she styled herself the new Isis and appeared in public wearing the robe sacred to the goddess. Meanwhile, the coins going out to the Greek cities and to Roman traders carried a hard-faced Hellenistic monarch with a diadem and a nose you could open letters with. Same woman, same decade, 2 completely different pictures aimed at 2 audiences who are never going to compare notes. That's not vanity. That's a ruler with a small army and a very large neighbor, doing the only thing available to her, which is making herself indispensable to everyone at once. It worked for over a decade. Then Rome came apart again, and this time both halves of it wanted Egypt, in 41 BC. Mark Antony, who now controlled the eastern half of the Roman world, summoned her to Tarsus to explain herself. She arrived by river, and Plutarch's description is the most cinematic paragraph in ancient biography. A barge with a gilded stern, purple sails spread, silver oars keeping time to flutes and pipes and lutes, and the queen herself under a gold-spangled canopy dressed as Venus in a painting, with boys got up as cupids fanning her on either side. Read that as staging rather than seduction. She's been ordered to appear as a subordinate. She turns up as a goddess, on her own vessel, on her own schedule, and makes the most powerful man in the East come to her. The alliance held 10 years. Twins in 40 BC, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene. A third child later. In 37 BC, Antony handed her territory across Cyprus, the Levant, and the North African coast, and separated from his wife, who happened to be Octavian's sister. Then in the autumn of 34 BC came the thing that couldn't be walked back. In the gymnasium at Alexandria, in front of a crowd, Antony proclaimed her Queen of Kings, proclaimed her 14-year-old son King of Kings and the true son of Julius Caesar, and carved up Roman territory among her children by name. Octavian was in Rome. He'd just been handed a weapon. What he did with it is the reason we're having this conversation at all. He obtained a document he said was Antony's will and had it read out in the Senate. It said Antony wanted Roman land left to a foreign queen's children, that he recognized her son as Caesar's real heir, and that he wanted to be buried in Egypt instead of Rome. Whether that will was genuine is still argued over by historians, and it didn't matter then either. It did the job. It let Octavian tell Romans that their own general had been captured by an Eastern woman, and Rome already had every prejudice needed to believe it, about the East, about luxury, and above all, about women with power. So in 32 BC, Rome declared war. Not on Antony, a Roman, which would have made it another civil war nobody wanted. On her, a foreign enemy. A tidy piece of legal fiction that turned a power struggle between two Romans into a patriotic defense against a queen. The poets fell in behind it. Propertius called her the Whore Queen. Later writers took the reframing as read. As Stacy Schiff puts it, the turncoats wrote the history, and a woman's authority spelled a man's deception. Every deal she'd made was the ordinary business of a client monarch. Written up afterwards, it all became seduction. And notice what Octavian never once asked for in any of it. He never asked for her dead. The fighting settled it on the 2nd of September, 31 BC, in the Ionian Sea off Actium on the Greek coast. Don't trust anyone who gives you exact ship counts, because the ancient tallies disagree with each other, and the modern ones disagree about the ancient ones. Roughly, Antony had somewhere around 400 to 500 hulls, including her squadron, heavier ships, slower. Octavian's Admiral Agrippa had over 400, lighter and quicker, and a device called the harpax, a grapple fired on a line and hauled in by winch, which reportedly took 15 of Antony's ships out of the fight early. What actually decided, it wasn't the hardware. It was that Antony's own fleet came apart underneath him. 3 squadrons abandoned the battle. 2 more surrendered outright. Her squadron broke away and ran for open water carrying the war chests, and Antony took about 40 ships and followed her, transferring across to her flagship at sea. People have been calling that cowardice for 2,000 years. Look at what she was carrying. If the treasury goes down at Actium, there is no army to raise afterwards, and no kingdom to negotiate for. They got back to Alexandria and waited most of a year for the invasion everybody knew was coming. Octavian invaded in the summer of 30 BC, and Antony's forces melted away in front of him. On the 1st of August, Antony was told a story that wasn't true, that she was already dead. He ordered his slave Eros to kill him. Eros killed himself instead. So Antony ran himself through with his own sword and made a mess of it, and didn't die. She'd sealed herself into a mausoleum by then and wouldn't open the doors for anyone, so they brought him to the wall and she let down ropes and cords and hauled him up herself with the help of her 2 women. Plutarch's picture of it is unbearable. Antony smeared with blood and struggling with death, stretching out his hands to her even as he dangled in the air. He died up there. What he said at the end wasn't about Egypt. He told her to trust Octavian's officer Proculius and to think of him as lucky for the good things he'd had, since he'd become the most famous of men, won the greatest power, and had now been beaten by a Roman, which was no disgrace. That advice about Proculius was the last mistake he made on her behalf. Proculius came to negotiate. While he kept her talking at the door, other men put a ladder to the mausoleum window and came in behind her. She saw them, went for a dagger, and was caught by the wrist before she could use it. That's the moment the whole ending turns on, so understand what she was afraid of, because it isn't guesswork and it isn't a modern invention. It's written down in both surviving accounts. A Roman triumph was a parade. The general rode through the city and the defeated were walked in front of the crowd in chains for the day, before the ones who mattered were strangled in a cell at the end of the route. Octavian wanted her alive for that. Plutarch has her at Antony's tomb, allowed out under guard, saying it straight to the dead man. Do not permit a triumph to be celebrated over thyself in my person. Cassius Dio, writing 2 centuries later and working from other material, reaches the same conclusion about her. She chose rather to die with the name and dignity of a sovereign than to live in a private station. 2 independent ancient writers agreeing on her motive. She had 11 days. On the 12th of August 30 BC, guards opened the room and found her dead on a golden couch, dressed in full royal state. Iris was dying at her feet. Charmian was still on her feet, barely, adjusting the diadem on her queen's head. A soldier asked her if this was a fine thing to have done. It is indeed most fine, she said, and befitting the descendant of so many kings. Then she went down beside the couch. Now the snake. There is no snake. There's a basket that had held figs, and a story about a basket that had held figs. Plutarch lays out the versions: an asp brought in with the fruit, an asp kept in a water jar, poison hidden in a hollow comb, and then writes the sentence that should have ended 2,000 years of confident retelling. The truth of the matter no one knows. No snake was found in the room. No mark of poison showed on her body. All he'll confirm is that her arm had 2 slight and indistinct punctures. Cassius Dio, 2 centuries later, opens the same subject the same way. No one knows clearly in what way she perished, for the only marks on her body were slight pricks on the arm. The German historian Christoph Schaefer argues she used a drug mixture instead, opium, hemlock, and aconite, because the sources describe a quiet, painless death, because 2 attendants died with her, and because a cobra in the August heat is a sluggish and unreliable employee. That's a reconstruction, not a finding. The honest position is still Plutarch's. Her son was already running. She'd sent him toward the Red Sea and Nubia with money and a tutor before the end came, and his tutor, a man named Rhodon, talked him into turning round, telling him Octavian meant to give him the throne. He was intercepted on the road and killed on Octavian's order. He was 17. Plutarch preserves the line that decided it, from an advisor called Arius, a bleak little pun on a line of Homer. Not a good thing we're a Caesar too many. That's the answer to the problem she created on that September day in 44 BC, when she sat a small boy on a throne and told the world whose son he was. There could be one heir of Julius Caesar in the Roman world, and the one who survived was the one with the legions. Egypt stopped being a kingdom the same summer. Octavian made it tributary and put a man called Cornelius Gallus in charge, and then he did something he did nowhere else in the empire. He barred Roman senators from so much as visiting Egypt without his personal permission, because whoever held Egypt held the grain, and whoever held the grain could starve Rome. 3 centuries of Ptolemaic rule ended in a fortnight, and the last of that line was a boy on a road. So where did the woman you picture come from? Start with the face, because it's the easiest thing to check. She's the only Ptolemaic queen who put her own portrait on coinage in her own name, and it survives across her whole reign. What it shows is a strong, hooked nose, a sharp chin, a jaw, an expression like a bad meeting. Smithsonian describes a 32 BC coin as a rather homely Cleopatra with a large nose, narrow lips, and a sharp chin. The 2 marble heads most scholars accept as her, one in Berlin and one in the Vatican, were matched to those coins in the first place, and they show the same face. Then there's Plutarch, who had every reason to make her dangerous and beautiful, and instead wrote this. Her beauty, as we are told, was in itself not altogether incomparable, nor such as to strike those who saw her. He puts the effect somewhere else, in her conversation, and in a voice he compares to an instrument of many strings. Our best source is telling us she wasn't remarkable to look at, and that it didn't matter. Everything you're picturing came later. Painters in the 1700s and 1800s produced hundreds of Cleopatras dying half naked on couches, and those pictures are evidence of nothing except what the 19th century wanted to look at. Then a film in 1963 put Elizabeth Taylor in the eyeliner and finished the job. Octavian didn't only defeat her. He wrote her, in 32 BC, for a war, and the character he invented outlived his empire. What's left when you take the costume off is a better story than the costume. A ruler who took the throne at 18, got thrown out of her own capital, came back, and then kept a country the Romans could have swallowed in a season independent for 2 decades by making herself worth more alive than annexed. She learned the language her family had ignored for 300 years. She signed her own decrees. She played a Greek monarch on the coins and a pharaoh on the temple walls in the same week, and she lost in the end to a man with more legions, which is how most people lose. The last thing she did was refuse to be walked through Rome in chains, and she managed it. 2,000 years later, we still can't say how. Then the winner's version got carved into the poetry, and the poetry into the paintings, and the paintings into the films, and that's the woman who arrived at your house. So which one got you? The carpet that was a bedsack, the snake nobody ever saw, or the fact that our best ancient source says she wasn't beautiful and said so on purpose?